Hello and welcome to the Bougie in a Backpack podcast. I'm Mackenzie from Travel Mackenzie, and I'm here today with Corinne. Corinne is the bucket list travel coach for aspiring solo travelers who just want to get their dream trip booked. Having taken dozens of solo trips herself, Corinne knows firsthand how daunting traveling on your own can feel, from the planning right through the trip itself. In addition to her own travels, Corinne now helps wannabe solo travelers stop daydreaming and start confidently crossing those forever destinations off their bucket list through her bucket list to booked programs. So welcome, Corinne.
Hi.
So Corinne also was a speaker at our Bougie in a Backpack Virtual Travel Summit, where she spoke about top tips to overcome the overwhelm while planning solo travel, which I think is something, whether you're solo traveling or not, I think a lot of people relate to overwhelm, and I think it's stopping a lot of people from traveling. So Corinne, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and what travel was like for you growing up and what travel means to you now?
Yep, sure. So growing up, my family didn't really have a lot of money, so we didn't really do a lot of vacations when I was a kid. We occasionally did a little road trip a few hours away, but that was kind of it. So I grew up wanting to see the world. And so finally, when I was 29, took a while, but when I was 29, I'd saved up enough money, so I decided to go on my first solo trip. Definitely got bitten by the travel bug then, and then have been traveling solo kind of once a year or so ever since. Yeah.
Yeah. So what was your first solo trip? What was the one that did it for you?
My first solo trip was to the US. Went and visited friends there in LA, did Disneyland and that kind of thing. And then, just fell in love with it. And then, started doing longer and longer trips every year ever since then.
Yeah, it's so funny to hear about people traveling to the US as like a destination, because I'm like, I'm already here, And Angel is in LA. You could have visited her.
Yes. It's funny for me, because in Australia, you hear, I'm the same, like I hear people, I would love to come to Australia.
Yeah.
Yes.
What part of Australia are you from?
I grew up in Sydney, but I live in Melbourne now, so right at the bottom of the country, yep.
Oh,
Or the mainland with, yep.
those are both places that people love to visit too.
Yeah, exactly.
It kind of makes me curious, when you're planning a trip to the US, like what are the destinations that people try to go to? Like what's like the vacation spot? Is LA probably one of them, or at least it's maybe like a bucket
LA is
list?
definitely one of them. Yeah, New York's probably the next most popular, or equally as popular, I would say, coming from Australia. Those two would be the main. Yeah. And then, people, sometimes they want to go to the middle of the country too, or skiing. There's a lot of people go skiing in Colorado. So, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it's pretty similar to what people who are already in the US, like where they travel to as well. So I guess it makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you took your first solo trip and you've been solo traveling ever since. What is it about solo travel that you love? Like, what does solo travel mean to you?
Solo travel I love because I get to do it on my own terms. So I might be meeting people while I'm going around, but I can go where I want, when I want, how I want. And I'm kind of not worried about, we've got to do all these things as a group, which sometimes then you miss out on the things that you want to do. So that's kind of one thing that I like about solo travel. And the other thing I like about solo travel is whenever I go on a solo trip, I always learn something about myself. So it's not just the trip that's the important thing. Like, I'm obviously having a good time while I'm doing it, hopefully. But then, you learn how resilient you are. You learn how to rely on yourself. You learn how to deal with things that just go wrong, which sometimes they can go spectacularly wrong. So you just learn how to deal with, hardships, which makes it easier then when you're coming back in your everyday life. You can learn, those lessons you learn on your own, you can start applying to your own life outside of travel.
Yeah, I definitely agree that I think travel itself is a journey of self-discovery, but especially when you're by yourself, you're figuring things out yourself. You are just making little decisions like, where am I going to eat? But you don't have people whispering in your ear, like giving you the answers, or you don't have someone who's like swaying your decision either way.
Exactly. So you don't have to worry about, this person wants to do this thing and go to this restaurant, and this person wants to go and do this thing, and this person wants to see this place, but this person doesn't. So you can kind of go where you want to go. And like I said, eat what you want to eat, see what you want to see. So, you can do, like I think it just gives you a little bit more freedom. It's always fun traveling with people too, but on your own,
Mm-hmm.
it's really up to you what you want to do. And if there's days you want to have off, like,
Yeah.
you get up and no, I'm not feeling it today. I'm just going to go and sit by the pool or, sit in the room. You can do that too. You're not kind of, stuck with anyone. Not stuck's not the right word, but, you're not having to answer to anybody else to say, well, no, we really want to go out today. Yeah.
Yeah, I've definitely found as I get older, there's more like, why don't I just stay in even if you're on a trip, you have this FOMO feeling of, oh, I have to go do this. But sometimes it's like,
Yeah.
maybe I can just relax and be here. And when you're traveling with others, they might be pulling you in directions that you're like, I don't have the energy for that right now.
Exactly. And I found that too as I've gotten older myself. Like, even on my own, I'd be like, well, I have to fill every day with something. I have to be doing like 50 things that day and go this place and that place. And then you just come home and you'd be more exhausted than when you left. And so, I've learnt that now too, that, you can take your time. You don't have to do everything all in one day. You don't have to do 100 things in a day if you don't want to. So I've learnt that too.
Yeah. And you touched a little bit on how when you solo travel, things can go wrong. And we're talking about overwhelm here and, getting stressed while planning solo travel. So what aspects of planning solo travel do you think are the most stressful? Do you think it's the uncertainty or the like assuming that the worst thing possible is going to go wrong?
Yeah, so it can be very easy to spiral. You think, well, this could go wrong and that could go wrong. And am I going to be safe? And what's going to happen? And if I miss this flight, how am I going to get to where I'm going to go? And what if the accommodation's no good? And, am I going to be lonely? So you can spiral very easily. So that's one thing about the overwhelm is like, how do you deal with all these things and make sure you're staying excited about going and it doesn't feel like a chore when you're on your way or when you're there? And then the other thing the other couple of things I think that people really struggle with and get overwhelmed by is what they have to plan, like how much they have to plan. And when you start looking at it, if you want to go overseas, there's flights, there's transport to the airport, from the airport, where am I going to stay? What do I want to do? Do I want to stay in one place? And all of a sudden, all these decisions you have to make just feel too much. Like it's too hard. There's too many things I have to do. So I'm just not going to do it because it's just easier not to. Or they'd feel like they don't have the time. So, yes, I can do all these things, but I don't have the time to book it, or I don't have the time to take the trip, or I don't have, there's not time to make sure I've got everything packed and done before I go. So that kind of thing. And then the other thing I find with solo travel too is that everybody's got an opinion on whether you should or shouldn't be going and where
Yeah.
you should go and what you should do, even though they're not coming with you.
Mm-hmm.
But that can be hard too, especially if you've never done it before. Everybody having an opinion on what you should do, whether it's even a good idea that you go, that can kind of dissuade you from going, because then you have this, feeds into that self-doubt that, is this a good idea? Should I be spending this money? Am I going to be safe? What am I going to do? Am I going to be alone? Am I going to feel lonely? All that kind of stuff.
Oh yeah, definitely. Do you have an example of places where people told you like, oh, it's not safe or oh, you shouldn't go by yourself, but you had no trouble at all there?
Yeah, funnily enough, the one that I hear the most is when I go to the US.
Yeah.
Because unfortunately, sometimes people have an impression like that everybody over there is, there's like places that aren't safe, especially some of the cities aren't safe. And I've never had a problem as long as you keep your wits about you, If you're feeling unsafe, you don't continue what you're doing. Yeah, like there's plenty of places like that. I've heard other people say, other countries as well. But funnily enough, whenever I say I'm going to the US, people are like, oh, you sure it's safe?
That's funny to me because it's like the amount of times where I've traveled somewhere, like I just got back from Colombia, which a lot of
Yep.
people will say, oh, it's so dangerous, which there is crime. I know people have gotten their phones stolen and stuff. And there are like, it's not, you can't be completely ignorant to everything going on, but it doesn't mean
Yes.
like you're not going to like walk outside and something's going to happen to you. And like things like that can
Exactly.
happen to you in the US too, or they can happen to you wherever you
Yeah.
live.
Things can happen to you anywhere. And it's just, like I said, it's keeping your wits about you while you're out and about, not purposely going somewhere dangerous. Like make sure you research before you go, especially where you're staying. Like I found a couple of times I've done that where I haven't kind of researched properly where I'm going.
Mm-hmm.
And I've ended up staying in probably not the safest neighborhood for a solo woman to be staying.
Yeah.
So making sure, yeah, that you check before you go, check safety advisories, talk to other people that have been to those places. And then once you're there, just, again, making sure you're not going off on places where, people have said you shouldn't go there. Don't go there then, things like that. Just, yeah. But I think sometimes, people just have the wrong impression of places, or, they've heard things that make it more scary than it actually is. And like you said, if you're not going, you're not going to immediately be attacked the second you walk out the door. So
Hmm.
yeah,
Yeah. It was, you brought up looking at the location in the city you're staying. And that reminds me, when I booked a trip to Geneva with me and my husband, Geneva, it's Switzerland. Everyone thinks like, oh, so safe and everything, but it's really expensive. And when I was looking at hotels, I found a hotel that looked okay and it wasn't too expensive, but it was in a
yeah,
very seedy part of town. Like it wasn't, unsafe, but there was like a lot of, it was like, I don't know if it was like the red light district, but there's a lot of things going on in the streets that we were like, oh, okay. Maybe we didn't pick the best part of town to stay in. And, but it's like, you never know, like wherever you're going, there's always
yeah,
probably a better place to stay versus a not as good place
exactly.
to stay.
Yeah. And so as long as, I think the same thing, as long as you like, obviously we've both learnt that lesson. Yeah. As long as you're looking into where you're going and making sure that, speak to people that are actually there or that have been there and know the area. Because like I said, I mean, even here coming to Melbourne, there's places, that aren't necessarily as safe as somewhere else you could stay within the city. So, it's everywhere.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
when you start planning a trip, what do you recommend people start with? Because there's so many things, and that's what gets people so overwhelmed. Like, what would you recommend is the first thing they think about to maybe just start chipping away at that planning?
Yeah. I would say before you even think about exactly where you want to go, work out why it is you want to go. Is it just that you want to get away from life at the minute? You just want to break? Is there somewhere in particular you want to see? Do you want to go on a journey of self discovery? Are you at a crossroads at your life when you want to go away and make some decisions? Do you want to go and live somewhere else for a while? Just work out why it is that you want to take the trip before you worry so much about the where. And you may have like the where in the back of your head, but just I've seen a lot of people lately, and I've said that said to me, and in kind of just in general, seeing people around, a lot of people are taking like 5, 6 month trips
Hmm.
and then getting there 2 weeks into it and being like, why did I do this? And
Mm,
it's too long. I don't want to do this. And especially it might have been the first time they've decided to travel
yeah.
and they've just bitten off too big a chunk. And, then that's not the kind of thing that they wanted to do. So that's where I would kind of start is why you want to go. And then once you've worked out why you want to go, then work out where. Is the where that you've got in your head matching your why? Or is there something you can do to match the why? Or is there something else on like your bucket list that you would match where you want to go? And so kind of once you've worked out the why and you've got a where that matches, it makes it easier to then take the next steps of, well, how am I going to get there? When am I going to go? All that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I think that's great advice that probably most people don't even do when they travel. They just maybe they hear a location and they're like, oh, I'm gonna go, and then they might be miserable on the trip because it didn't align with them.
Yeah. Yeah. And they are, it's, like I said, it could be, I've seen a lot of that lately where people are just going for way too long because that's what everybody says, or you should go and, immerse yourself in the culture and all that kind of stuff. And that's important. But if that doesn't suit your kind of personality and what you're wanting to get out of the trip, you're kind of setting yourself up for failure before you've even left. And then that adds to the overwhelm while you're there, because then it's like, well, what am I going to do now? I'm here. Do I try and go home? Then I'm going to have wasted all the money if I do go home, or if I don't go home, is it going to get better? That kind of thing. So yeah, thinking about where you want to go, I think is kind of the best starting place. And then you kind of match your where to your why, and then you can match how long do I want to go then? Like what's going to be comfortable for me? So yeah, I feel like I said, I think that's the best place to start.
Yeah. And I kind of think and like, you feel free to disagree with me, but I feel like there's kind of two different people. Like, there's people who are like, once they're starting to plan a trip, they get really excited and they're starting like to plan all the things and they get really excited about every little detail. And then there's some
Cool.
people, and this is where more like my camp. And I think it's more a personality thing in general, not just about travel. But there's some people who are like, oh my gosh, like I want to go and I'm excited, but like I don't want to figure out all these things, like it's like a lot
Yes.
of things. There's like the difference between some people are channeling that towards excitement and like getting excited about planning everything, and the other people are just overwhelmed.
Yes. And so, yeah, I think there's definitely both camps. I kind of fall same thing into the other camp where even though I've done this so many times now, it still is a bit daunting once you start again, because then you start thinking about, well, now I've got to pack all this stuff. I've got to make sure I've organized tickets and flights and everything else. And then you start thinking, well, what happens, like I said, if you've missed a flight, or, if you have to have connecting flights, what's going to happen, or how I'm going to get around when I'm there. And so it does feel very overwhelming then, how many things you've got to plan and book. But then, it's just, and I'm not, like you said, I'm not one of these people. There is definitely people, that like every single thing that they're doing is going to be so exciting, and every single part of the planning is going to be exciting. But yeah, I'm definitely not in that camp either.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
do you think it gets easier if you're someone who gets overwhelmed? Like it gets easier with the more trips that you take, or it's just like different levels?
I think it's different levels. I don't know whether you found that yourself, but I think it's different levels. Like there's still, even though I've been doing this for, many years now and have taken so many trips, sometimes it does still feel a little bit overwhelming, especially if what you had planned to do to get organized, you've kind of missed that window. And then you've suddenly got a whole lot of stuff to plan kind of at the last minute. So then you kind of feel, yes, even more overwhelmed.
Yeah.
I don't know, I don't always succeed, but I do try now, which is what I kind of coach people on too, is how to make sure you're doing something every single day towards the trip, so that you're not kind of trying to do everything at the last minute.
Yeah. I mean, I think for me, I've gotten a little bit worse because I've gotten more lackadaisical over the years. So I'm like, I used to be like, okay, especially if I was traveling, even if I was traveling domestically, but especially if I was traveling internationally, I would think, okay, international flights are so expensive, or like if I'm using points or whatever, that this probably has ruined it for me too, using points, because now I'm like, oh, I'll figure it out. Like I'm gonna find a good deal, like it's gonna happen. But I used to be like, okay, I need to get my ticket booked as soon as possible, and then so I can start figuring everything out. Just because I was honestly because I was anxious about it, because not because I was like excited, but because I was like, if I don't figure this out, like I'm gonna be
Yes.
screwed up. There's gonna be no flights left. But now I'm like,
Yeah.
there'll be flights left. The price might go down. There might be more
Yeah.
award space. Like so I've kind
Yeah.
of like actually gotten worse about it. And that's like, I don't know. It's like at least
Yeah.
when I'm not stressed when I'm not fully planned. But now it's just like for
Yeah.
me, if I can at least get my, my flights and hotel booked, then I'm like, all right, I can figure things out from there. It does help though if
Yeah.
you think about things as a whole, because maybe you'll pick a different hotel because the transportation's different, or maybe you'll pick
Yeah.
a different, you fly into a different airport because you realize it's an hour closer to the city that you're actually visiting than
Yeah.
the main airport.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm kind of the same too. I don't worry so much about planning like every single minute of my trip. As long as, like you said, you've kind of got the basics down. If you kind of work out what it is you definitely want to do and see while you're there, you don't necessarily have to know what day and time you're going to do it, unless there's something you have to book for. Like that's something obviously when you research, you might have to book to see a particular place. But I just worry about, well, these are the things I definitely want to see. They're kind of in this area. So then I should stay at this hotel, or I should stay in this area. And so I've got to fly into this airport. So I kind of then, once I've worked out where I'm going and where generally it is I want to go, then I work out, well, what are my must sees? Like if I leave this place and I'm just going to be thinking forever, I really wish I'd gone there, then that's what I worry about. And then but I don't worry about, like I said, unless I specifically have to book something, like if it's a festival or something like that, obviously you want to time it around that. And then you have to book it. Then I tend to just generally not worry about, what all the day-to-day little nitty-gritty things. It's like you said, then I just kind of work backwards. Well, this is where I want to go. This is where most of the things that I want to see are. So this is the closest place to that of the hotel I can see. So therefore I need to go into this airport. I could go into this one, but like you said, well, this one's an hour closer. So then you kind of work out that stuff. And as long as those main things are worked out, I don't kind of worry then about, well, I have to know what I'm doing, at 8 o'clock on the first day. And
Yeah.
from there, you just kind of, and I think too, you kind of learn that over time as well. Like the more trips you take, you just learn, well, I don't have to have every second planned.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas, the first time you're taking it, you might be like, well, no, I have to make sure I'm here and then I'm here and then I'm here. And so you've got all of your days planned out. Yeah.
Yeah.
And the
Yeah.
other thing I like about not worrying about planning every day so much is it leaves you room for happy accidents as well.
Yeah.
Things that you think that would happen, or places that you got there and you think, oh, I didn't even know about this place. I'm just going to go off and do this today instead. So you're kind of not feeling like, well, but I said I was going to do this today. You're not kind of committed to that anymore.
Yeah, I think it's sometimes you arrive somewhere and you're like, oh, I would love to just stroll around and go to a little cafe or like go to a wine
Yeah.
bar or something, but you had your itinerary, you had morning, afternoon, and evening all planned out, and like
Yes.
you're booked back, you already paid for everything, and then you don't have
Yeah.
room for these little fun little outings.
Yeah. Exactly. And so no, I've kind of learned that the more trips that I've taken, yeah, that it's not so important to plan every second of every day because, then you've got room to discover things that you didn't even know. Like you said, my wine bars or cafes or something like that, or, it could be like a nice botanical gardens or something that someone's recommended to you that you didn't know about till you got there. So I think especially the first time you kind of take your first solo trip, you might overplan everything even the first few times. But then, yeah, like you said, the more I've traveled, the more I've went, well, no, as long as I've got the basics down and I know where I'm staying and how I'm getting there, and these are the things I definitely want to do while I'm there, then everything else will just kind of fall into place.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, what about bucket list trips? I know you do a lot of bucket list trip planning. Do you think
Yeah.
bucket list trips make people more overwhelmed because they have this like high expectation or they need to meet it? Or what do you think about
Yeah.
that?
Yeah. I think bucket list trips do have like, yeah, everyone thinks they need to be big
Mhm.
and that it can be disappointing when you've had this place on your list for so long and you get there and it's just like nothing like what you thought it was going to be. So a lot of the work I do is kind of helping people prepare for that. Like one, I think it's important you cross things off your bucket list, but two, not to have not to be overwhelmed by your own expectations when you get there. Like, let's be, yes, it's exciting, but let's be a bit more realistic about what's going to happen when you get there. So, because like you said, then people can just get overwhelmed by the expectations or they get there and they're disappointed because it's not what they thought it was going to be. Like I was saying before, they just plan to stay there for way too long because it's such a big thing. And then it feels like a big thing too. Like, I think even though booking travel anywhere is basically the same, whether it's a big bucket list item or not. It's basically the process is the same thing. But I think sometimes people, because it is a bucket list item, they're just instantly overwhelmed by, well, I have to make sure it's perfect. I have to book and plan all these things. And so they just don't do it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
What's some examples of bucket list trips that you've helped people plan or that you've planned for yourself?
I've planned a couple of different, like New York was a big one for me.
Mhm.
And so I planned that. And, like it was a little disappointing, but also one of the most amazing trips I've ever had because again, you kind of build up this in your head. And, especially in Australia, we watch all these TV shows like Sex and the City and stuff like that. You have this
Yeah.
expectation of New York, and that's not what it is when you get there.
Uh,
But you can still have an amazing time regardless. And so, I had some great times there, again, with a lot of happy accidents. With my clients, I just helped someone recently. They play the ukulele
Oh,
and they had decided that what they've always wanted to do it was go to the UK and play in a bunch of ukulele festivals. And
wow.
so but she was feeling like she couldn't do it or that it was a silly thing because that's a lot of things that I find too, especially for solo travelers. With your bucket list things, people will just tell you it's silly.
Yeah, like it's like
And so then you
frivolous
just,
or I don't know.
yeah, exactly. Like, what are you going to do that for? I encourage people, well, if you want to do it, it's your life, it's your business. You do what you want to do that makes you happy.
Mhm.
And even if you get there and it doesn't turn out to be what you want it to be, that doesn't mean you're going to have a terrible trip. You can still have a great time. You just have to, kind of switch what you're doing or look at it differently. So I just helped her recently in July book into all these ukulele festivals through. the UK. And she just let me know recently, she came back and said that it was soul filling for her. She just felt so fulfilled that she'd finally done these things, and she got to play with these amazing groups of people and travel around and see a lot of the UK in doing it. And it just was everything she wanted it to be.
Wow, that's amazing. I love that. And that's kind of inspiration for, your bucket list trip doesn't have to be like, it doesn't have to be going to New York or Paris or going to Tokyo. Like a lot of people have similar destinations, but it could also just be
Yeah.
the experience that you want to do in a different place that you feel like you can't do maybe at home.
Yeah, exactly. And so that's kind of what I encourage people to look at. Like we all have those big destinations, like let's go to New York or let's go to Italy or let's go to Spain or all that kind of stuff. But if there's other things you want to do, like a lot of people I help as well will do things like comic conventions in America. That's a big thing, but they feel silly doing it because they don't kind of share that passion with anyone else in their life. And people say the same thing, well, that's frivolous. You shouldn't spend money on that. But why not? If it's going to make you happy, it's your money, spend it on what you want. You can't take it with you, and same thing, they'll go and they'll have an amazing time. They'll connect with a group of people that share the same passion that they do. And, then you can do other things while you're there. You don't have to focus on just those things. And that was something that when she was traveling around doing the ukulele festivals, is that it wasn't just that, but she got to see, they ended up doing a road trip. So they got to see lots of the UK that they wouldn't have seen otherwise if they just flown over there and gone, let's go to Big Ben, let's go to London Bridge, let's, go to Buckingham Palace and just do the big things.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I love that. So your topic for the Bougie and Backpack Virtual Travel Summit was all about how to overcome the overwhelm while planning solo travel. So if you could give us a little bit of a sneak peek about what you talked about in your session. For those who weren't able to attend it live, we still have the VIP goodie bag available, and we'll have that linked in the show notes where you can get access to all of the sessions, including Corinne's. So if you give us a little sneak peek about what people who grab the VIP goodie bag and watch those videos, what they'll get out of your session.
Yeah. So what I basically give you is the 3 tips on how to get over the, oh my God, I have so many things to plan part of it. How to actually create the time in your schedule, even if it's just 5 minutes a day, because that's better than nothing. You can still book a lot of stuff in 5 minutes a day, because you can, easily book a flight. You can easily book your hotel. You can research hotels in 5 minutes and then book it the next day in your next 5 minutes. So I help you with that. And then I help you connect with that why. So like I was talking about earlier, I just think the why is so important as to actually making a successful trip. And so I help you with that too, because knowing the why helps you with the other people's opinions. So when everyone else is kind of chiming in with, you shouldn't do this, this is silly, all that kind of stuff we've been talking about, if you know why you want to go, you can just keep coming back to that why and why that's important to you, which helps you stop worrying about what everybody else is saying and then spiraling into, well, should I be doing this? Is this a waste of money? Is this a waste of time? I could be spending money on this instead, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. I think that's great. Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Corinne. Thanks for talking with us today. If we want to learn more from you and we want to learn about your different ways of booking travel, where can we find you on the internet?
You can find me on Instagram at Bucket List Travel Coaching. And you can also find me at the same website called Bucket List Travel Coaching. So you can find me in either place.
Okay, awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Corinne. And thank you for listening to this podcast today. If you enjoyed the podcast, or if you learned something new, or if you were inspired, if you could let us know what you think. We do have the Bougie virtual mailbag available. That's in our show notes as well. You can let us know what you think, like what topics you want to hear about on the podcast. And we also appreciate it if you can give us a 5-star rating and a written review. And that really helps us to keep putting on this podcast and to keep putting on free virtual summits. So we have our next one coming up in January. We'll have the link for that in our show notes as well. And we'll see you next time.